7 True Skinwalker Horror Story. 1. The thing that wore my brother's face. My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you what happened to my family. This is hard to talk about even now, years later, because most people don't believe in skinwalkers. They think it's just folklore, superstition, something from old Native American legends. But I've seen things that can't be explained, and I know the truth is far worse than anyone wants to admit. It started in the winter of 2015 when my brother David came back from a camping trip in Arizona. He'd gone alone for the weekend, something he did every year. When he returned, everyone noticed something was off, but we couldn't put our finger on what it was. His laugh sounded the same, his voice was identical, and he looked exactly like himself. But something in his eyes was different. It was like looking at David through a foggy window. At first, I figured he was just tired from traveling. David had always been the adventurous one, the one who liked being alone in nature. But as days passed, the strangeness grew worse. He would sit in the kitchen at 3 a.m, just staring out the window without moving. Mom found him like that twice. When she asked what he was doing, he said he was listening. When she pressed him about what he was listening to, David just smiled that strange smile and walked away. Then came the incident with the animals. Our neighbor has a dog, a friendly golden retriever named Bailey. David had always loved that dog, would pet her whenever we visited. One afternoon, Bailey came to our fence and David walked out to say hello. He was out there for maybe 5 minutes. When he came back inside, Bailey was acting completely insane. She was barking and growling, jumping at the fence, trying to get away from our house. She wouldn't go near it for weeks after that. The neighbor told Mom that Bailey had never acted that way before in her entire life. She actually brought the dog to the vet because she thought it was sick, but the vet found nothing physically wrong. The dog was just terrified of something that came from our property. My mom started noticing other things too. David would eat entire chickens raw, just tearing into them with his bare hands in the middle of the night. He would leave bloody feathers all over the kitchen, and when confronted, he wouldn't remember doing it. He said he'd been sleeping. The really disturbing part? He would smile when we told him what he'd done. Not a normal smile either. It was too wide, and his eyes didn't participate in it. It was like he was watching himself smile from somewhere else inside his own body. I started researching everything I could find about strange behavior and possession. I read about mental illness, dissociation, even drug use. Nothing fit. None of it explained the way David moved, the way his joints seemed more flexible than they should be, or the way he sometimes seemed to be listening to conversations that weren't happening. One morning, I found David in the backyard at sunrise, standing completely still with his arms out at his sides. He was facing directly into the sun, not blinking, not moving. When I called his name, he didn't respond. It took me physically pulling on his arm to get him to move. When he finally blinked and looked at me, it took a few seconds for recognition to come into his eyes. He asked me what I was doing outside. He had no memory of going into the yard. No memory of standing there for what must have been at least an hour. Then my girlfriend Sarah came over. This was maybe 3 weeks after David returned from his trip. Sarah had always been friendly with David, and when she arrived, he asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. Something inside me screamed no. I can't explain it, but I felt this primal warning, like something ancient inside my brain was telling me to protect her. I told Sarah I'd walk with them instead. David's face did something weird when I said that. His expression flickered for just a fraction of a second, and something genuinely dangerous looked out at me from behind my brother's eyes. It was like looking through a window and seeing something predatory staring back. We went for a walk around the neighborhood, and the whole time David kept doing these weird things. He would tilt his head at odd angles, too far to the side, like his neck was more flexible than it should be. He kept smelling the air, really smelling it, like a predator trying to catch a scent. His movements were jerky and unnatural in ways I can barely describe. Occasionally, he would stop completely and stare at something we couldn't see. When we asked what he was looking at, he'd just say them and point at empty air. But his eyes followed something, tracking it across the sky with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When we got back home, I found David in the kitchen, and his neck was positioned at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. His chin was nearly touching his shoulder, and he was staring at Sarah with this look of hunger and curiosity. Sarah felt it too. She left immediately after that, telling me she didn't feel well. That night I called my uncle who lives on the Navajo reservation. I told him everything, describing David's behavior, the strange movements, the animals' reactions, everything. He went completely silent. Then he asked me if David's trip had taken him near any specific areas. When I mentioned the exact location, my uncle actually gasped. He said that area was known, that people had reported strange things happening there for decades. He told me stories of hikers who'd gone missing, of people who'd come back changed, of things that could wear human skin like a coat. He told me to get David to a healer, someone who understood the old ways. He told me it was serious, more serious than anything I could imagine. But before anything could happen, David disappeared. He left in the middle of the night. We found his bed empty, the window open. The thing is, our house is on the second floor. There was no ladder. No way he should have been able to get down without breaking his legs. But what disturbed me most was what we found outside. There were animal tracks around the house. Deep, heavy paw prints that looked like they belonged to a large wolf or mountain lion. Except wolves and mountain lions don't live in our area, and these tracks seemed to circle the house multiple times before heading into the forest behind our property. There was also something else, scratch marks on the outside of the window frame, like something had been clawing at it from inside, clawing to get out. My uncle came immediately and performed a ceremony. He wouldn't tell us all the details, but he said that if David was still in there, if any part of my brother remained, the ceremony might bring him back, or at least help him move on. He burned sage and cedar, and he chanted in a language I didn't understand. Mom cried the whole time. We never saw David again after he ran into the forest that night, but about 8 months later, my mom got a call from a hospital in Utah. A man matching David's description had been found wandering near a national park. He had severe injuries, no memory of the past year, and didn't know his own name. We drove up there immediately, and I've never driven so fast or so recklessly in my entire life. The man in the hospital bed looked like David, but he wasn't. He was so thin, like he'd been starved, his ribs visible through his skin. He had strange bite marks and scratches all over his body, some of them infected, some of them old and scarred. His eyes had no recognition in them whatsoever. He didn't know who we were. The doctors said they'd never seen anything quite like his condition. They ran every test imaginable, but all they found was severe malnutrition, dehydration, and evidence that his body had been subjected to extreme stress. Over the next 3 months, he slowly started to improve and his memories began to return, but they were fragmented and didn't make sense. He remembered being in the desert, remembered running through the forest, remembered an overwhelming hunger. He remembered being in places and doing things, but from the perspective of watching himself do them, like he was a passenger. He couldn't explain how he survived or what happened to him during that missing year. The doctors attributed it to trauma and dissociation, but I knew better. I'd seen him during those months he was missing, or rather, I'd seen the thing wearing his shape. The worst part came after he recovered enough to leave the hospital. David told us that sometimes late at night, he could still feel something inside him, something that wasn't him, something that was always hungry and always angry. He said it felt like there was a passenger in his body that never fully left, something that had set down roots inside him and didn't want to leave. He'd wake up at night and realize his hands had been doing things his mind didn't authorize. He'd find food missing from the refrigerator, and there would be blood on his face when he woke up. The doctors prescribed medications, therapy, all the standard treatments. But nothing worked. 3 years after he came back from the hospital, David took his own life. In his note, he wrote that he was afraid the hunger would take over again, that he couldn't live with the thing that was sharing his skin anymore. He wrote that sometimes he would look in the mirror and the reflection would move differently than he was moving, and he knew that time was running out. He wrote that he'd rather die himself than let that thing take full control. I believe my brother was taken by a skinwalker, something that wore his body like a suit for those missing months. And I believe that even when his consciousness came back, some part of that thing remained with him. That's what scares me most now. Skinwalkers don't just hunt and kill. They contaminate. They leave a mark on the people they touch, a wound that never fully heals. And sometimes I wonder if what killed my brother wasn't suicide at all, but that thing finally taking complete control and ending the struggle by killing the original consciousness that was resisting it. I also wonder if that thing is still out there, still hunting, still wearing whatever shape it decided to become next. Story 2. The Hitchhiker on Route 66. My name is James, and I've spent my entire career as a long-haul truck driver. I've logged over 3 million miles across this country, seen things that would make most people's skin crawl, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to me on Route 66 outside of Gallup, New Mexico, one night in October. I was alone, heading south toward Albuquerque, around midnight. The road was completely empty. You get to know roads after driving them for 30 years, and there was something wrong with that particular stretch. The air felt heavy, and even though my radio was working fine, I couldn't get a single station to come through. Just static, endless static. I remember thinking how strange that was because I'd driven that same road 100 times before. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the highway, thumb out, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 1960s. I should have driven past. Every instinct I had told me to keep going. But I was tired, and something about her seemed to pull at me. I slowed down without even consciously deciding to. When she looked at my truck, she smiled, and I saw something in that smile that made my stomach turn. But I stopped anyway. She climbed into the passenger seat without saying a word. She didn't say hello, didn't introduce herself, didn't even acknowledge me. She just sat there staring straight ahead out the windshield. I asked her where she was headed, and she didn't respond. I asked again, and she turned to look at me. Her head moved too slowly, like her neck was barely bending. When she finally faced me, I could see her eyes weren't quite focused. It was like she was looking at something behind me, not at me directly. "I'm going wherever you're going," she said. Her voice was strange, hollow, like it was coming from very far away. I should have kicked her out right then. I should have told her to get out of my truck. But instead, I just put the truck in gear and started driving again. The whole time she sat perfectly still, not moving, barely breathing. I turned the radio back on, and I could finally get reception. There was a news report about a woman who had gone missing on Route 66 in 1967. She was hitchhiking to California, and she was never found. When they described her, I felt my blood turn to ice. The description matched the woman sitting next to me exactly. Same clothes, same appearance, everything. I glanced over at her, and she was watching me. She was always watching me, I realized. And she was smiling that same wrong smile. "How did you end up on that road?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I didn't end up anywhere," she said. "I've always been there. Every night I stand on that stretch of road, and every few months someone picks me up." My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "What happens to the people who pick you up?" She turned away from me and looked out the window again. "Nothing happens to them at first. They drive me where I want to go, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes all night. And when we get where we're going, I get out, and they drive away. They never remember picking me up. Never remember having a passenger. They just lose time. Hours and hours gone. They get home late and don't know why. They can't explain where the time went. I didn't know what to do. I was doing 80 miles per hour on a deserted highway in the middle of the night, with a thing that looked like a woman but clearly wasn't. I thought about swerving off the road, about crashing, about anything that would stop this situation. But I was frozen with fear. "What are you?" I whispered. She didn't answer at first. But then she spoke so quietly I could barely hear her. "I'm what happens when you try to hold on to something when you shouldn't. I died on this road a long time ago, but I wasn't ready to let go, so I didn't. I found out how to keep wearing this shape, how to keep walking this road. Skinwalkers know how to do this. They taught me before I killed them for it. Now I'm stuck here, and so is everyone who picks me up. We exist together, in the time between for just a little while." I don't know how long I drove. I looked down at the odometer and it wasn't moving. The truck was running, we were moving, but the mileage wasn't changing. The clock on the dashboard was flashing wrong times, skipping around erratically. And when I looked out the window, the landscape wasn't changing either. The same stretch of desert road repeated over and over again, like we were trapped in a loop. Then suddenly we were on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The hitchhiker stood up even though the truck was still moving. I screamed at her to sit down, to hold on to something, but she didn't care. She moved to the door and opened it while we were still going 50 miles per hour. "Thank you for the ride," she said. Then she jumped out. I swerved and nearly crashed, but I managed to pull over. I looked in the mirror, expecting to see her crumpled on the road, but she was just standing there perfectly still, watching my truck. Then she turned and started walking back toward the highway we came from. I drove to the nearest town and pulled into a gas station, shaking so badly I could barely hold the pump. When I looked at my watch, I realized that I'd lost 8 hours. 8 hours! My phone showed I'd received calls from my dispatcher, my wife, all at timestamps that made no sense. But worst of all, when I checked my truck's logbook, there was no record of me driving through that section of road. The computer systems in the truck showed a gap, a blank space where those hours should have been. I called my wife and she was frantic. She'd been trying to reach me all night. But when I told her where I was, she said that was impossible. I shouldn't have been anywhere near Albuquerque at that time. According to all tracking systems and records, I was still 300 miles away. I'd somehow covered that distance in no time at all. Or rather, I'd covered it in time that didn't exist for anyone but me. I quit truck driving 3 months after that. I haven't been back to that stretch of road since. But sometimes late at night I hear a sound on my front porch that sounds like someone thumbing a ride. And sometimes I see a figure in the road outside my house just standing there, smiling that same wrong smile. I'm telling this story because I need people to know. If you're driving Route 66 late at night and you see a hitchhiker, especially a woman in old-fashioned clothes, don't stop. Don't ever stop. Because you might lose more than just time. You might lose yourself. Story 3. The Camp That Vanished. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm a wildlife biologist. For 20 years, I've led research expeditions into remote areas, studying animal behavior and ecosystem health. I pride myself on being rational, scientific, and grounded in logic. What happened to our expedition team in the San Juan Mountains in 2018 shook that faith in the rational world to its core. We were studying a declining elk population, trying to understand why the herd had become so depleted over the past 5 years. The area was remote, accessible only by hiking deep into the mountains. Our team consisted of 5 researchers, 3 guides, and 2 support staff. We had plenty of supplies, satellite communication equipment, and months of planning behind us. Everything seemed normal for the first 2 weeks. We collected samples, set up camera traps, and documented animal behavior. The guides, all of whom were experienced and familiar with the mountains, kept us on track. One of the guides was a man named Thomas who was Ute. He'd grown up in the region and knew it better than anyone I'd ever met. On the third week, Thomas started acting strangely. He became paranoid, always looking over his shoulder, always positioning himself so he could see all around us. He refused to let us set up camp in certain areas, claiming that something was wrong with the land in those places. When we questioned him, he wouldn't elaborate. He just said we needed to leave the area and go back. My team thought he was losing his mind. We had work to do, data to collect, and we were already behind schedule. So we overruled Thomas and we decided to continue our research. This was a mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my life. That night, Thomas came to my tent. He looked terrified in a way I'd never seen before. He said we needed to leave immediately, that something was hunting us. He said there was a Skinwalker in the area, and it had marked us and it was going to come for us when darkness fell. I was skeptical but also concerned. Thomas was a competent guide and not someone prone to exaggeration. I asked him how he knew this. He told me about tracks he'd found, strange tracks that looked like they belonged to multiple animals but were too close together to make sense. He said that local Ute people avoided this part of the mountains for a reason. There were stories about something that lived up there, something that moved between forms that hunted people. He said that the declining elk population wasn't natural. Something was culling them and it wasn't any known predator. I convinced Thomas to stay one more night. I said we'd reevaluate in the morning. I've asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't listen to him. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was scientific skepticism that had gone too far. Either way, I made a terrible choice. That night around 2 a.m, we heard the screaming. It came from the eastern perimeter of our camp. It was one of our guides, a man named Robert. His screaming was the most terrible sound I've ever heard. Not just fear or pain, but something else too. Confusion, betrayal. We all ran toward the sound, but Thomas grabbed my arm and held me back. He told me not to go toward it, that it was a trap. But Robert was screaming his lungs out, and I couldn't just stand there. When we reached him, I wish I hadn't. Robert was at the edge of a ravine we hadn't known was so close to our camp. His right arm was gone, completely severed. He was bleeding to death in front of us, and he kept pointing at something behind us and screaming that it was wearing his face. We all turned around and I saw it. It was a deer, but it was wrong. Incredibly wrong. Its body was too large, its limbs too long and articulated wrong. Its head didn't sit right on its neck, like the joints were reversed. And its eyes. Its eyes were looking at us with an intelligence that a deer should never possess. The eyes were almost human, almost knowing. It looked right at Robert and made a sound, a wet, clicking sound that came from deep in its throat. Then it started changing. I know how that sounds. I know that what I'm describing shouldn't be possible. But I watched, frozen in horror, as the shape of the creature began to shift. Its limbs rearranged themselves, its body expanded and contracted, bones cracking and reforming. Within seconds, it looked like Robert. Exactly like him. It had his face, his body, his clothes. The only thing that didn't match was the eyes. Those terrible wrong eyes. Our team fled. Robert kept screaming behind us, and we could hear his voice changing, warping, becoming something else as we ran. We didn't go back to camp. Thomas led us down a ravine, and we just kept moving. Behind us, we could hear something following us. Multiple things, actually. Or maybe one thing in multiple shapes. Sometimes it sounded like a man calling our names. Sometimes like an animal howling. Sometimes like something between the two. We walked all night and into the next day. We were terrified, disoriented, and running on pure adrenaline. When we finally stopped, we realized something terrible. There were only 4 of us left. 2 members of our research team had vanished without us even noticing. We hadn't seen them fall behind. We just looked around and they were gone. We made it out of the mountains and we contacted the authorities. A rescue team was sent to find Robert and the 2 missing researchers. They found the remains of our camp, but they found no bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing except our equipment scattered around the tents. They found evidence of a large animal in the area, possibly a mountain lion, but no corpses. It was like Robert and the other two researchers had been erased from existence. The official report concluded that Robert had probably been attacked by a mountain lion, that he'd either died from his wounds or crawled away to die somewhere else. The other two researchers were simply listed as missing. The investigation was eventually closed, but I know what really happened. And I know that Thomas was right about something else too. He said that once a skinwalker marks you, it doesn't fully leave you. It watches, it waits, and sometimes it comes back. Because 3 years later, Robert called me. My phone rang, and when I answered, it was Robert's voice, but it was wrong. Like his voice played backwards and then reversed again. He said that he missed me, that he wanted to see me again, that we had unfinished research to complete. He said he was coming back, bringing the others with him. When I told him that he was dead, that he was killed by the thing on that mountain, he just laughed. That terrible, wet, clicking laugh. He said I'd misunderstood everything. He said Robert hadn't been killed. Robert had been chosen. He said the thing up on that mountain wasn't hunting us. It was recruiting us. And he said it was very patient and very good at hunting. That was the last I heard from that number. But sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from blocked numbers. They contain photos of the mountains where we conducted our expedition, photos of our camp, photos of me, taken from angles where no one could have been, and in every photo there's a shape in the background, just barely visible, but always watching. Story 4. The Thing in My Sister's Reflection. My name is Angela, and I'm writing this because I need someone to understand what's happening to my family. What's happening to me. My sister Maya and I have always been close. We're twins, born just 20 minutes apart, and we've spent almost every day together for the past 35 years. 6 months ago, Maya came back from a weekend trip to visit a friend in Colorado. She drove alone, and when she came home, she seemed the same as always. Same laugh, same personality, same Maya. But there was something I noticed immediately that made my skin crawl. When I looked at her reflection in the mirror, it didn't match perfectly with her movements. It was off by just a fraction of a second, like her reflection was lagging slightly behind reality. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But I couldn't unsee it once I'd noticed it. Every time I looked at Maya standing in front of a mirror, her reflection was just slightly asynchronous with her actual movements. I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't even mention it to Maya herself, because how could I? How could I tell my sister that I thought something was wrong with her reflection? She'd think I was insane. Then the animal started acting strange around her. My cat, which had always loved Maya, started hissing whenever she came near. My dog wouldn't let her touch him and would growl low in his throat if she tried to pet him. When we visited my parents' house, their dog had to be locked in a bedroom because it became so aggressive around Maya. My parents didn't notice anything was wrong. They said the animals were just being weird. People's pets act strange sometimes, but I knew better. I knew that animals respond to things that humans don't always consciously register, and something in Maya was terrifying them. I started doing more research, looking into folklore, reading old stories about things that weren't quite human. I found information about skinwalkers, about how they could take on human forms but could never quite perfect the imitation. The reflection thing kept nagging at me. I read that some cultures believed reflections couldn't lie, that they showed the true nature of a thing. So I set up an experiment. I put a camera in the corner of Maya's bathroom, one that she didn't know about. I told myself it was to help me understand what was happening, that this was the only way. Looking back, I know it was a violation of her privacy, but I was terrified and desperate for answers. When I reviewed the footage, I felt my entire understanding of reality shift. In the mirror, the thing that looked like Maya was moving completely independently, while the physical form was sitting on the bathroom floor applying makeup. The reflection was doing something else entirely. It was moving in ways that no human should be able to move. Its joints bent the wrong way. Its head rotated almost completely around on its neck, and the expression on the reflection's face was nothing like Maya's serene, focused expression. The reflection looked angry, hungry. It was moving its mouth like it was trying to communicate with something, but no sound was coming through the camera's audio. This went on for hours according to the timestamp. The physical Maya sat still, but the reflection was contorting itself into shapes that should have been impossible. Toward the end of the video, the reflection looked directly at the camera. It couldn't have known the camera was there, but it looked right at it, and I saw intelligence in those eyes. Horrible, wrong, alien intelligence. I deleted the footage and I told myself I was overthinking this. Maybe it was a digital glitch. Maybe there was an issue with the camera. I tried to convince myself of anything that would make the video make sense. But then things got worse. Maya started spending more and more time looking in mirrors. She would stand in front of them for hours, just staring at herself. My mom noticed that she had mirrors in her bedroom, her bathroom, her car, mirrors everywhere. And whenever Maya was near a reflective surface, she seemed almost entranced, like she was communicating with something. I hired a therapist to talk to her, claiming I was concerned about depression. But when the therapist interviewed Maya alone and then talked to me afterward, she said everything seemed fine with Maya. She said my sister seemed well adjusted and showed no signs of any mental health issues. One night, I worked up the courage to confront Maya directly. I asked her if something had happened to her in Colorado, if something strange had occurred on her trip. She looked at me with this strange smile and she said, "Why do you think something happened to me?" I told her about the animals, about the strange behavior, about the way her reflection seemed off. And she laughed. She actually laughed at me. She said she could explain everything. She said that what I was seeing wasn't something wrong with her. She said it was something right with her. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. She felt like she was exactly what she was supposed to be. When I asked her what she meant, she walked over to a mirror and touched the glass. "Do you want to see?" she asked. "Do you want to see what I really am?" The reflection in the mirror didn't move when Maya moved. It just stood there, smiling that terrible smile. Then it pressed its palm against the glass from the inside, and I heard a voice that wasn't Maya's voice. It was layered like multiple voices speaking in unison, and it said one word: "Soon." Maya turned back to me and her face was completely normal again, but those eyes, those were not my sister's eyes. "It's already inside me," she said, "and it's going to be inside you too. That's why I wanted you to see. That's why I came home. I needed to mark you so it could find you too. When you look in a mirror now, you'll start to see it. The other you. The true you. And eventually you won't be able to tell the difference anymore. Since that night, I've been afraid to look in mirrors. I know that if I see my reflection moving independently, I'll break. I'll completely lose my grip on reality and sanity, but I can hear it sometimes moving around inside the glass. I can hear it calling to me in my own voice. My sister Maya is still here. She looks exactly like herself. She acts normal around other people, but I know that the thing that came back from Colorado is wearing her like a suit. And every day I'm afraid that when I look at a mirror, I won't see myself looking back. I'm afraid that my reflection has already been replaced and I'm the only one who hasn't realized it yet. The worst part? Yesterday I went to the bathroom and found new mirrors. Mirrors I didn't buy. Mirrors in places they shouldn't be. And I haven't yet found the courage to look at them. Story 5. The Preservation. My name is Dr. Henry Wasson, and I'm a forensic anthropologist. I've spent 40 years studying remains, understanding how bodies decompose and change over time. I've analyzed skeletal remains from archaeological digs, crime scenes, and disaster zones. I thought I understood death. I thought I understood what was possible for the human body. Then I discovered what was in the storage facility beneath the Mesa Verde Visitor Center. I was conducting a research project examining the ancient remains of the ancestral Puebloan people. I had permission to access the climate-controlled storage area, where thousands of artifacts and remains were kept. It was my third day of cataloging when I found the door that shouldn't have been there. It was at the back of the storage facility, behind a section that was supposed to have been sealed off decades ago. The door was old, made of corroded metal, and it had no lock on the outside. I should have reported it immediately and asked for permission to investigate. But I was curious, and that curiosity opened a door to something terrible. Behind that door was a room. A large room that wasn't on any official plans of the facility. And inside that room were bodies, dozens of them, preserved somehow, arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. Some of them were ancient skeletal remains that could have been centuries old. Others were more recent. The most recent corpse looked like it couldn't have been dead more than a few months. I should have left immediately and called security, but something compelled me to step inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. A presence. Something that had been waiting in that room for a very long time. The bodies were arranged in such a way that their heads all pointed toward the center of the circle, and in the center there was something carved into the stone floor. A symbol. Something I didn't recognize, but that made my skin crawl when I looked at it. I took photographs with my phone, and I tried to leave. But the door wouldn't open. I pushed and pulled, but it was stuck. I kept trying for maybe 10 minutes, growing more panicked. Then I heard something, a voice coming from all around me at once. It was speaking in a language I didn't understand, but I could feel the meaning of it in my bones. It was old, older than old. It was primal and angry. That's when I looked down at the bodies more carefully. All of them had their eyes open. All of them were looking at me, and all of them began to move at the same time. They didn't move like normal bodies would move. Their joints bent in too many directions. Their necks twisted impossibly. They rose from the ground without using their limbs, just floating upright as if suspended by invisible strings. And they all turned their heads to look at me directly. I screamed. I must have screamed for a very long time because by the time security arrived, they found me unconscious on the floor, my voice completely hoarse, my throat bleeding. When I woke up in the hospital, I told the authorities about the room. I gave them my photographs. They said they found the door and they opened it, and there was nothing inside except an empty room. No bodies. No symbol. Nothing. They said I must have hallucinated the whole thing, that I'd had some kind of psychotic break. But they didn't explain something. Where did my photographs go? The images on my phone were corrupted, all of them showing just static and darkness. It was like something had reached into my phone and destroyed the evidence. I was given medical leave, psychiatric evaluation, and the whole incident was written off as a stress-induced psychotic episode. But I knew what I'd seen. 3 months later, I received a package at my home. Inside was an ancient photograph. It was black and white, taken sometime in the early 1900s. It showed the same room I'd been in, the same circle of bodies, but there was something else in the photograph. Standing behind the circle, looking at the camera, was a man, or something that had worn the shape of a man. Its eyes were ancient and empty, and it was smiling. On the back of the photo was a message written in handwriting that looked like my own. It said, "Thank you for opening the door. Now we can feed again. Now we can walk. You've been marked as a keeper. Congratulations. I've tried to convince myself that someone sent me that photo as a sick prank, but I know that's not true. Because lately I've been having dreams. Dreams where I'm standing in that room and all those preserved bodies are coming toward me. Dreams where I understand that they're not really dead. They're something else. They're something that's been sleeping, preserved for centuries, waiting for someone to break the seal. And in these dreams, I can feel my body changing. My joints are bending the wrong way. My skin is growing cold. I can feel myself becoming like those bodies in the room. And I understand with a terrible clarity that's the point. That's always been the point. The keepers, these things wearing human skin, they preserve bodies because those bodies aren't dead. They're part of something larger, something that exists between forms, between shapes. And opening that door wasn't an accident. I was guided there. I was chosen. Last week I found a preservation room of my own, in my basement. I don't remember building it, but it was there, and there was a body inside, a fresh body. It looked like me. It was me, or what I used to be. I've been looking in mirrors less and less lately. I think I'm starting to understand what my sister Angela experienced. I think I'm starting to understand what happens when the keepers decide you're no longer useful on the outside. I think I'm starting to understand that there are many more of us than anyone realizes. And we're all slowly becoming something else. We're all becoming keepers. We're all starting to wear the skin of the dead.
Story 6, the school bus route. My name is Michael Torres, and I've been driving a school bus for 18 years. I know every street on my route, every pothole, every turn. I know the kids' names, know their parents, know their little routines. I take pride in my work. Getting children to and from school safely is a responsibility I've never taken lightly, but something changed on a Tuesday morning in November that made me question everything I thought I knew about. My job and my life. I was driving my usual morning route in a suburban area outside of Phoenix. The bus was full, maybe 30 kids ranging from kindergarten to 8th grade. It was a normal day. The weather was nice, the traffic was light, and the children were behaving themselves. I'd made this exact same drive probably 1,000 times before. That's when I noticed the new stop. I didn't remember adding a new stop to my route. I checked my clipboard and there was a new address listed. 4847 Sycamore Lane. It wasn't on my original route sheet, but it was clearly written in the same handwriting as the rest of the route. My handwriting, but I didn't write it. I know I didn't write it. I should have called dispatch and asked about it. Instead, I just drove to the address. When I pulled up to 4847 Sycamore Lane, there was a boy standing at the curb. He looked about 9 or 10 years old, wearing a backpack and regular school clothes. He looked exactly like a normal kid waiting for the bus. But something about him was wrong. His posture was too stiff, too rigid. He didn't shift his weight or look around like normal kids do. He just stood there perfectly motionless, staring straight ahead. When I opened the doors and he climbed aboard, none of the other kids acknowledged him. Usually, when a new kid gets on the bus, the regular passengers at least look up. But these kids didn't even glance at him. He sat in the middle of the bus, completely alone. The seat next to him remained empty the entire ride, even though the bus was crowded and there were no other available seats. It was like the other children were actively avoiding sitting near him. I told myself everything was fine. He was just a quiet kid. Maybe he was new to the route. Maybe dispatch had updated the information without telling me. These things happen. The next day, when I arrived at that same stop, there were 2 boys waiting. They looked almost identical, with the same rigid posture and the same unsettling stillness. They boarded the bus without saying anything, and they sat in the middle again, perfectly motionless. By Friday, there were 5 of them. By the following week, there were 12, and they kept multiplying. Every morning, there were more of them standing at that same stop. They all had the same rigid posture, the same blank expression, the same unsettling quality of not quite being real. The other children were terrified of them, but they wouldn't talk to me about it. When I asked the kids what was wrong, they just said that everything was fine. but I could see the fear in their eyes. Then I started noticing something else. Every time I picked up more of these strange children, one of the regular kids would disappear. Not from the bus, not during the route. They would get off at their normal stop, but they would never get on again. I kept a mental note of the children, and I was certain that kids were missing. I called the school and asked if they were aware of any transfers or dropouts. The principal said that everything was normal, that no students had left, but I knew that wasn't true. I'd been driving these kids for years. I knew who should be on my bus. By the third week of this, there were more of the strange children than there were regular children, and I started to understand what was happening.
These things were replacing the kids. Every child that boarded my bus and then got off to become one of them was being replaced by one of these strange, still creatures. I decided I had to do something. I called dispatch and told them I was sick and couldn't drive the route. I needed someone else to take over my bus for a day. When I handed over the keys to another driver, a man named Jake, I tried to warn him. I told him that something strange was happening, that he needed to be careful. Jake just laughed and said I was being ridiculous. When I heard the news the next morning, I wasn't surprised. Jake had completed the morning route, dropped off all the children, and then he'd crashed the bus into a highway overpass that afternoon. The bus was totaled. Jake was in critical condition. But here's what disturbed me. When the police reported on it, they said Jake had claimed that he'd blacked out completely during the drive. He had no memory of the children, no memory of anything except waking up in the wreckage. I went back to driving my route the next week. I thought that by stepping away I could break the cycle. But when I arrived at my first stop, there was a note on my seat. It was written in my handwriting, but I didn't write it. It said, "Welcome back, Michael. We missed you. Don't try to leave again." Now every morning I drive my route, and every morning more and more of my regular students are replaced by these blank-faced things that wear their shapes but aren't them. I've watched at least 40 children disappear over the past 3 months. Their parents don't seem to notice. When I ask the office about the kids, they tell me they're attending school normally, but I know the truth. Whatever these things are, they're using my bus as a means of transportation. They're moving through the city, replacing children, spreading, and I'm helping them do it. By driving the route, by not stopping them, I'm facilitating whatever this is. Last week, I noticed something even more terrifying. The drivers I see on the roads, the ones driving other school buses, they're starting to have that same rigid quality, that same stillness. When I make eye contact with them at red lights, I see that same blank expression. I think they're replacing us too. The drivers, the staff, everyone. This morning I looked in the mirror and I noticed that I'm moving a little differently. My joints are feeling a bit stiffer than they should. And when I tried to smile, my face didn't quite respond the way it should. I think it's starting to happen to me too. I think that by driving the route, by being close to them, I'm becoming like them. I've considered crashing the bus. I've thought about driving it off a bridge or into oncoming traffic, but I don't think it would stop them. I think they'd just find another driver, another route, another way to spread. And I think if I try to kill myself, they'd stop me anyway. They need me. They need someone who knows the routes, someone who understands the system. Every morning I get up. Every morning I drive. And every morning I feel a little less like myself and a little more like something else. The children on the bus, both the real ones and the things that look like children, they watch me while I drive. And sometimes, in the rearview mirror, I catch them smiling that wrong smile. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what's happening. I need someone to understand that if your child's school bus driver seems a little off, if your kid comes home and doesn't quite seem like themselves, you need to pay attention. You need to look carefully at the small details, because it's already too late to stop it. But maybe, just maybe, someone can figure out how to survive it. Story 7.
The nanny, my name is Rebecca Hartwell, and I'm a mother of 2 beautiful children. I've worked hard to build a good life, a safe life for my family. I have a successful career as a lawyer, a loving husband, and 2 kids who mean the world to me. That's why I was so careful when I hired a nanny to help with childcare. Her name was Claire, and her references were impeccable. She had letters from 3 families she'd worked for previously, all glowing in their praise. She was professional, kind, and seemed to have a genuine love for children. When I hired her 2 years ago, I felt like I'd found someone I could truly trust with my most precious treasures. I was completely wrong. I didn't notice anything strange at first. Claire was excellent at her job. The house was clean, the children were happy, they were well fed and well cared for. But gradually I started to notice small things that didn't quite add up, patterns that were too perfect, behaviors that were too controlled. One afternoon I came home early from work and found Claire standing in my daughter's bedroom. She was just standing there, perfectly still, staring down at my sleeping daughter. When she heard me come in, she turned, and her smile was completely wrong. It was too wide, and her eyes didn't move with her mouth. It lasted for a fraction of a second before her expression normalized, but that fraction of a second changed everything. I started paying close attention after that. I installed a hidden camera in the living room. Something I'm not proud of, but I was becoming increasingly uneasy. When I reviewed the footage, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. When I was gone and my children were asleep, Claire would change. Her movements became jerky and unnatural. She would walk on her hands and feet in a way no human should be able to do. She would tilt her head and rotate it completely around on her neck. She would make sounds, clicking sounds with her throat. And she would go into each child's room and just stand there, watching them sleep for hours at a time. But the worst part was something I noticed about her skin. Sometimes it didn't quite fit right. It looked like it was a little loose on her body, like she was wearing it and occasionally forgetting how to wear it properly. I wanted to fire her immediately, but I was afraid. I was afraid of what she might do if I tried to remove her from my home. And I was afraid because I couldn't explain any of this to anyone. If I told my husband what I'd seen, he would think I was insane. If I told the authorities, they would want to see evidence. And I only had a hidden camera recording that I shouldn't have made. So I did something I'm deeply ashamed of. I kept quiet and just watched her. I tried to figure out what she was, what she wanted, why she was with my family. One night my son woke up screaming. It was around 3 a.m. I ran to his room and found Claire already there, sitting on the edge of his bed. Her face was just inches from his face. When I turned on the light, she didn't jump or look startled. She just slowly turned her head to look at me, and I saw something in those eyes that wasn't human. He was having a nightmare. She said calmly, I was helping him through it. My son was sobbing, absolutely terrified, pointing at Claire. He said she'd come into his room while he was asleep and started touching his face. He said her hands were cold and that her fingers were wrong, bent in weird ways. That's when I knew I had to act. I told Claire that I wouldn't be needing her services anymore. I said we'd decided to change our childcare arrangement. She just nodded and she didn't seem upset or surprised. She seemed to accept it without any emotion at all. That made it worse somehow. She packed her things and she left the next morning. But she didn't really leave. She moved into a house across the street from us. I don't know how she did it or who allowed her to rent it, but she was suddenly there, living in a home with a direct view of our house. I could see her sitting in the window, always watching my children, and the kids started acting strange. My daughter became withdrawn and quiet. My son had nightmares every single night, sometimes twice a night. They both became fixated on looking out the window at Claire's house. They would stand at the glass for hours just staring. I called the police and reported that a threatening person was living near us. But they said there was nothing they could do. She wasn't trespassing or breaking any laws. She was just a neighbor who happened to live on our street. One afternoon I was looking for my daughter and I couldn't find her. I searched the entire house in a panic. Finally, I went to the garage and I found her standing at the garage door window, which looked directly at Claire's house across the street. My daughter was pressed against the glass, her palms flat against the window. Her posture was completely wrong, too rigid, too still. When I called her name, she didn't respond. She just kept staring at the window across the street where Claire was standing, also pressed against her own window, palms flat, staring back. It took me several minutes to get my daughter away from that window, and when I pulled her away, she cried and screamed like I was tearing her apart. That's when I understood what Claire was doing. She was trying to take my children, not to hurt them, not even to control them in the conventional sense. She was trying to turn them into something like her. She was trying to replace them or transform them or whatever this thing was that she was trying to accomplish. I packed my family up that night, and we left. We didn't even tell my husband what was happening. I just told him we were visiting my sister's house for a while. We've been here for 3 months now, living under a fake name, but yesterday I saw her. I was at a grocery store 3 hours away from where we're staying, and I saw Claire in the parking lot. She was standing perfectly still between 2 cars, just watching the store entrance. She made eye contact with me and she smiled that wrong smile. Then she slowly raised her hand and waved. I grabbed my children and ran. I've been driving ever since, and I know she's following us. I can see her in the mirrors sometimes, in cars behind us, always keeping the same distance. My children won't stop asking for her. They miss her. They call for her in their sleep. I think she's never really going to leave us alone. I think that by working in our home, by spending time with my children, she marked them somehow, and now they're part of whatever she is. And I think, eventually, she's going to come and take them away, and I won't be able to stop her. The worst part is that I'm starting to see her reflection in mirrors sometimes when she's not even around. And I'm starting to wonder if the thing that came into my house wasn't just interested in my children. Maybe it was interested in all of us. Maybe I'm already changing too and I just haven't realized it yet.